Hello, and welcome to the Unleash Your Inner Witch Masterclass. I've got a few people on live with me today, and I know there's a bunch of you who will be watching this recording. So whether you're here live or whether you're watching the recording, I just want to start by thanking you so much for taking the time to be here, and yeah, for showing up and being present. I think that this is a really big topic, the witch wound, and it's one that's starting to come into more consciousness. And so I thought it was a good time to bring it to the forefront, to chat about it and see what we can uncover and see what we can unleash. As far as there being a little bit of witch inside of us all, the witch wound really is what kind of points to this. And as we go through today and tomorrow, we'll talk about what the witch wound is, the history of it, how it shows up. We're going to talk about how it blocks us as well, how it's blocking you from your full potential, from leading your desired life. And even though it is primarily a wound that women carry or female identified people carry, it affects all of us and it weaves through our culture. So I do think it's important to touch on. To start, I usually say welcome, and if you want to drop in the chat where you're coming from, I believe the people on are coming from BC. Most of the people signed up are probably in BC, but if you guys want to chat to each other, get to know each other in the chat too, always feel free. And I said before we recorded that if anybody in the live audience wants to ask a question or chime in at any point, to just raise your hand or come off mute. I don't mind being interrupted at all. So, oh yay, Campbell River and Shawinigan Lake, both lovely, lovely areas. I am in Calgary, for those of you who don't know me. I'm in Calgary, Alberta, and I may as well dive into my introductions. Lots of you on this call or watching the recording will know who I am, but a lot of you don't. And so I am Eileen March. I am a registered midwife who is currently retired from that. I am a energy healer, and I did a year-long devotional energy healers training and became a wild medicine woman through that. And then I also am a life coach, and I did a year-long life coaching program through the Center for Applied Neuroscience, which was like the best of both worlds, the science and the woo coming together. And before we go into to kind of more depth about why I am bringing this topic to you, I want to start with a story, and it might not feel entirely relevant at first, but I think it'll make sense as we go through. So I was sitting here pondering, what do I start us with? What story do I tell? Where can I pull on the witch wound in my own life to make people who are here with us maybe aware of where it shows up in their life, that they weren't connecting those dots as that being what it was. And I immediately had this moment of remembering back to a middle school dance in grade 7. And if that's dropping in, it must be worth sharing. And so I was a nerdy kid. I was a shy kid, very shy. I think I've always been an extrovert. I didn't realize. I thought I was an introvert because I was so shy, but I was a shy extrovert. And I have always had opinions, and strong ones, and have generally been pretty good at speaking my mind. But I've often struggled with feeling self-conscious, and especially when I was in elementary, middle school, and high school. I wasn't popular. I was, as I said, really geeky and shy. And so there was a part of me that wanted to shine and show who I really was, and the part of me that really wanted to be loved for who I was and admired and appreciated. And of course, it's middle school. Kids are kids. We all want to conform. We want to be liked by our peers. And so this lands us at this dance. It was a Halloween dance. I'm pretty sure I was dressed up as a witch. And in my great grandmother's velvet dress. I remember that very specifically. And there was, partway through the dance, the DJ stopped the music to do this contest for a scream. So the movie Scream may have recently-ish come out at the time of this dance. I might be dating myself. It's like 25 years ago. And he wanted to do a contest where he pulled up, I think, like 6 or 8 kids out of the audience, and we each had to scream, and then the audience was going to vote on who won, and I can't remember what the prize was. I got picked, which was like, oh my gosh, yay, I manifested this picking thing. I didn't use that word then. And I was about in the middle of the line, and I remember thinking, like, how am I going to stand out? How am I going to be way like better and beyond these other girls screaming? And so when my turn came, not only did I scream, but I fell down, like as though I'd been stabbed and had fallen, or as though I had fainted in fear. And I thought that this was going to be like the thing that set me over the edge. And it was crickets. It was like you could hear a pin drop in that gym. And then the DJ said something along the lines of, okay, whatever that was then, and carried on. And I remember wanting to like melt into the gymnasium floor and disappear forever. And when I sat with this story as it came through a couple of days ago and wondered why it was the story to bring forward, there's so many layers here. So I overcame my witch wound to get up there and scream, and I was punished for it. I was punished by the conformity of my peers, even my friends, and I don't blame them by any means. I have no hard feelings about it, but they didn't even cheer for me because no one was cheering for me. And for them to cheer, that would be to step out of a crowd. And the adult in the room also made it worse and basically punished me for having stepped up. And so I wanted to bring the story forward because of how many ways the witch wound shows up, how much it has culturally impacted us, and how it keeps us small from the time we're quite young and we really internalize those messages until, we start to unpack it. So sitting with that story, and I could see the reactions of people on screen that like, oh, that poor little girl, and I feel that way for for my poor little girl self. You can start to think of your own stories, your own times where you wanted to say something or to step up and be visible or to do something different than the crowd. And often one of two things happens. Either you don't do it because you're afraid of those repercussions, which keeps you small, which keeps you stuck where you are, or you do it and it's deeply uncomfortable, and it can be. I do think there is a shift, and as we get older, obviously, we are more intentional with who we surround ourselves with. We find communities that do support us in stepping up and stepping out, but those wounds are still there and they're deep. So that's my little story to kick us off, which is bittersweet. It's a lesson moment for sure. And as we move into today's teaching and learning, I was looking and I was like, oh, is it too much of a bummer today, the history and how it shows up and all that? But it really felt important to kind of separate the two pieces of this masterclass. So today is really going to be about where it comes from, why it's there, the impact it has had over the years and the generations. And tomorrow will be more of the actual tools, the manifestation, how to start the healing process, though there will be homework today. So, are there any questions before I carry on? Oh, I see we have a puppy joining us. Animals always welcome. People always welcome in whatever state you're in. Okay, so before we drop into the teaching, I always like to do a guided visualization to bring us into the space together, to drop us into the energy. I do this in my one-on-one at the beginning of every session that I have with my clients, and then I do it as well in my masterclasses. So I'm going to pop some music back on, and those of you here can let me know. I think you should be able to hear my voice over it. Here it goes. It's a little bit quieter, this music. It's mostly just kind of a ambiance there for us. So if you're able, and if you're not, if you're working and you have to kind of be in two places, that's totally fine. You might want to return to this visualization later, but if you're able to close your eyes and ground into your sit bones, and begin to connect to your body. A good way to do this is by following the breath in through your nose as it fills your lungs and softens your belly outwards. Feeling that breath nourish each cell of your physical being, and allowing your muscles and ligaments to soften as the breath leaves your body. Really let the weight of your body be supported by the chair beneath you and the floor beneath that. Now, begin to visualize the generations of women who came before you. You may see them standing ahead of you, to one side or both, or in a line behind you. Bring to mind your mother, your grandmother, her mother, her grandmother, as far back as you wish to go. You were in your grandmother's body. You are a part of her. If you have physical children, your grandchildren were a part of your body as well, or will be. As you imagine the generations who came before you, turn to face them. Perhaps you see faces, perhaps only silhouettes, perhaps shining lights. Take a deep breath and feel their power, their courage, their love and support. Do they have any messages for you? Take a few moments here to connect with that powerful, divine feminine energy and listen for a message. Perhaps the message takes the form of words, perhaps an image, color, sound, or shape. Simply be here and receive it. And now, make them a promise that you will do what you can in this lifetime to heal the wound so that your granddaughters will not fear to shine. So that the women who come after you, whether they be of your blood or not, may step up and claim their power. You may be able to do much or only little. Both are equally good. Before you come back to your body, say any last words, goodbyes, sharing embraces that you wish with with these powerful women who came before you.
To the mother of us all.
And then slowly and gently reconnect your breath. Reconnect with your body. Bring your awareness back into the room. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes and rejoin us. Thank you. If you want to write anything down that came through for you, go ahead and do that. I'll give those of you live a moment to jot some notes. If you're watching the replay, you can always pause and write as much as you want. All right, I just paused it there so that those of us on live had time to write what came up. So let's drop into the history of the witch wound. So in a nutshell, the witch wound is an inherited collective trauma that really got solidified in our DNA, our bones around the burning times. And the burning times refer to kind of early modern Europe, the 16th, 17th century, at the height of the witch trials. During this time, tens of thousands of people, largely women, were imprisoned, tortured, and executed. And the estimates vary wildly, but the best guess at this point with the history that we have is that there was around 50,000 people killed in Europe between these two centuries. And another 100,000 or so were imprisoned, tortured, and exiled. And that 80% of them were women. So it was really, I mean, it's a gendercide. It was massive. I looked at the population of Europe at this time, and it was around 74 million. So it's a decent chunk of population that was persecuted. Not crazy, but crazy. a lot. Women who were accused and escaped execution were generally ostracized from their communities. And it was really a power grab. This was a way for the elite, white, rich males to control the masses. It was around the time when control was trying to be kind of conglomerated onto like estates, when land was becoming owned, and when power was being shunted to the hands of the few. And in order to stabilize their power and to keep people controlled, they had to control knowledge and wisdom. And women were the backbone of communities, as they still often are, and they were the knowledge keepers. So particular targets were wise women and healers and midwives and diviners and herbalists, and generally the people in the community who had the knowledge that people turn to and look to help cure disease or to help settle conflicts in times of scarcity, to call upon the deities and have that kind of ritualistic power. And then more generally, women who spoke their minds were also, I mean, can't have that running around, women speaking their minds. And most of us in North America, the white folk, the colonizer folk in North America, we have European ancestry. The beauty of science is that it's always catching up to what we have a felt sense of. And so we have epigenetics now that tell us that past traumas are actually encoded in DNA. And so 1600 is about 400 years ago. That's 12 generations roughly. And 12 generations is 4,094 ancestors. And so if we think about the numbers of your ancestors that were floating around Europe, it's quite likely that your direct ancestor may have been persecuted and targeted by the witch trials. And even if they weren't, they were living through that time of fear. And it really instilled, it was neighbors calling out neighbors so that they wouldn't be targeted. There was a lot of the whole point was to get people distrusting each other. There was a lot of mistrust. There was a lot of like, well, if I say my neighbor's a witch, then they won't say I'm a witch, and that kind of thing happening. And then of course the women who were actually persecuted were tortured, and so they gave up names because they were being tortured. And these types of things live on in our DNA, in our bones, and even if we didn't experience it culturally, it lives on in the way that society moved forward from that time, in the way that it really diminished women's power. It was already going down. Patriarchy and the rise of monotheism were the first real big blow to women's power, but this was really kind of like a shift in the cultural valuation of women as well, and especially in Europe. And if you believe in rebirth, then you might actually have lived one of these experiences, lived through this life. And in today's age, often women who lived life and were persecuted will be reborn as healers and midwives and wise women and be called to this work. And so those of us in the spiritual community, and I'm including everybody who's on this call, because if you're here, you're curious at the very least, there is a higher likelihood that you carry that ancestral trauma in your bones. And the wound exists on so many levels: soul level, DNA, as I've mentioned, cultural, and societal, which kind of came up in my story about the scream and being othered, and how that cultural fear of rejection, of othering, of women doing something different plays out on subliminal and not so subliminal levels in our lives. So today, we don't, in our culture, in our country, don't need to be worried about being burnt for our heretical notions, but there is still a really, really strong fear of being othered, of being too much, of being not enough, of being rejected. And I think when I was thinking about why it's so scary to be othered, because our friends, we generally know, we are close friends. Hopefully we have friends we can be ourselves with, and they don't care how much we are and what we're saying, and they'll still love us. But the broader othering from society, I think a big piece of why that's scary is that when humans other people, turn them into others, we do dehumanize them. And so much of the harm that we cause to other human beings is because we've othered them. And this came up for me recently. I was chatting with a friend about homelessness, and I'm sure everyone's aware it's on the rise, especially post-COVID with inflation, all of that, and how in a small town where everybody knows each other, you don't see homeless people because they're being taken care of. And I'm sure there are exceptions in places, but generally, the smaller the place, the smaller the group of human, the less likely anybody is going to be left outside to go hungry, to freeze. People take care of people they know. And the issue becomes when we stop knowing each other or stop recognizing each other's humanity. And so that fear of being othered, if we speak out, if we say something contradictory, if we are too much and too wild, I think is rooted in that feeling of being dehumanized. And then people can be real mean when they don't see you as your full human self. So healing the witch wound becomes a societal not task, but like I'm losing my word here. something that we do for other people as well, because it helps us, not others, and we become a really good role model and help ourselves as in the process as well. I'm speaking a lot about women and female identified folks. The witch wound does tend to show up more prominently for women, but it certainly can show up for men when we think about rebirth or DNA epigenetics. You know, half of our ancestors were men. 20% of the people who were persecuted during the burning times were men. And men carry the wound as well. It just doesn't tend to show up. It's a bit more hidden for them. It's more obvious for women. And of course, there are places in the world where it's still very much unsafe to be a woman. And so I'm always thankful when I'm addressing this topic and coming into this space that we do actually live in a place that is, relatively speaking, safe. But then I get really fired up because relatively speaking isn't enough. And thus here I am being loud about it. So before I move on, is there anybody who has anything that's kind of come up as we've talked through this that you want to give voice to? Feeling good?
I just want to share, first of all, the meditation was beautiful. I had a response that I was so not prepared for. Like, I
Mm,
literally, I don't know if it was the music or just envisioning the women surrounding me. It just opened my heart up. I just cried the whole time. So it was beautiful. Thank you.
you're welcome. I'm so glad.
And I just want to share that I'm kind of running into what we're talking about now, but it's not societal. It's me.
Mm, mm,
I'm scared as a 45-year-old woman to take the steps outside of my comfort zone
mhm,
for the first time.
mhm,
And sure, it's part me as well, but it's society too,
mhm.
because things that I'm doing are not mainstream. And you really do just second guess every single thing you're doing, no matter how firm you are in your beliefs and your ability, no
Yeah,
matter how long you've spent trying to focus on it, there's always something, someone, some judgment, preconceived notion that you have in your mind that comes in there.
yeah, for
It's
sure.
weird to look at it from a perspective of ancestral trauma. I've never looked at it that way before, and I've been learning for a long time about this sort of stuff, but I've never looked at it that way. So thank you for pointing that out and just making people aware of it.
You're welcome. Yeah, and I think it is. I like that you brought that up because I don't think I looked at it until this course dropped out of the sky. This is how it happens. I'm walking along like, oh, I need to do a masterclass on this. Now I have to learn all about it. Um, and so often before I prep for these masterclasses, I have a general idea of what I'm about to go into, but I haven't done the research. And so it is the same for me. And one of the beautiful things I think that these wounds give us, and the witch wound is one of a trifecta. There's the sister wound, the mother wound, and the witch wound. And the witch wound kind of wraps up the other two and is a part, like the other two are a part of the witch wound. But it takes some of the blame and shame we place on ourselves for not being able to overcome these things and gives us context. It's deep. It's lifetimes of not being able to step up and be visible. It's lifetimes of persecution and being told we're too much and being shushed and being sometimes violently, sometimes just psychologically shut down. And so that gives us the ability, at least for myself, to be softer with myself and gentler with myself and more compassionate when I fall back into those patterns. And I do, certainly. The more I step into this woo and witchery side of me, the more it's feeling like, ooh, every now and then I just want to retreat to my like, I'm a scientist. And I am. And I'm both. And we can be both because both are real and true. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Shannon.
Thank you, Eileen.
Yeah. And yeah, it's a perfect segue too into how does it show up? How does this wound, how does this ancestral trauma show up for us? And so, kind of just a list of things that come up: fear of speaking your truth. So, if you are talking to somebody and they have a really strong opinion and you have a different opinion or know something they don't, but you're afraid to say it, maybe you're afraid because there's going to be backlash from them. Maybe you're afraid because your truth might make them uncomfortable and you don't want to do that. But however that shows up, fear of speaking your truth. For me, this happens on social media often, where there'll be a social issue that I feel very strongly about, and I am afraid to bring that into the social media space, and that is fear of rejection. Also part of the witch wound, right? That fear of like, oh, well, some people might not like that, and so I'm not going to post it. The flip side of that is, well, those people really aren't for me then, because this is who I am. But it comes up, and it's something that you have to encounter, and over, it's gonna keep coming up. Fear of showing your true self and being visible. And so this comes back for a lot of people. I have a client who has a business. She's so talented, and she's really afraid of showing up and talking about her business or promoting her business, to the point of not even wanting it being mentioned in conjunction with her name sometimes. And this is that witch wound. It's like, woo, like, nope, that's too much, that's too big, that's too scary, I'd be too visible. And the history, the DNA is saying visible is bad, you need to stay hidden to stay safe and to stay alive. For me, this showed up as like this tug of war that I kind of spoke to in my screen story, is like my Leo rising. If anybody knows astrology pieces, Leo is a big, shiny, outgoing, like, look at me, center stage type astrology sign. And that's my rising sign. So that's how I naturally want to present to the world. And that got tug of war with my fear of being othered, being laughed at, being seen, being too much. So along the same lines, like dimming your light, shrinking yourself, hiding your gifts. So many women, and men too, we suffer from imposter syndrome. And it shows up often more strongly in women, or women are more likely to let it stop them. Something that struck me, and some of you may have heard this story before, is that when there's a job posting that lists qualifications, and a man and a woman who have the exact same level of qualification look at this job listing, if there are a few items in it that the man doesn't have, say, I don't know, expert at Excel, for instance, and the woman doesn't have that exact same thing, but otherwise they're exactly the same on paper, the man is more likely to apply for the job anyway than the woman. And so he is more likely to get the job than the woman. And so that's where that shrinking, hiding our gifts, not owning our talents, and not being able to step up and say, I don't have it all, but I can learn and do this. Again, blanket statements, but that's a statistical fact that more men will apply for a job they're not qualified for, quote unquote qualified, than women. And that's the witch wound. Doubting your intuition is big time a witch wound. And this one, I think, has been almost heightened in our current age. I know for myself, growing up, it was like science, rational, be rational, scientific. Woo is my dad told me that he's trying to explain to his friends what I'm doing now. And he was like, I don't know, some like woo stuff. And they thought he was slighting me. They were like, what? Oh, like, how could you say that about your daughter? And I realized, like, oh yeah, like woo is like woo. It's an insult, or it was. We've reclaimed that word. I've reclaimed that word. But it was a reminder to me that it's not so long ago that things like witchy stores and tarot and calling yourself woo really was not something you wanted to be associated with. Those were the out there hippies who were a little bit off the deep end, and really they just were way ahead of us. But that's, again, that witch wound, doubting your intuition, trying to be rational at all times, feeling not enough, and simultaneously feeling like you're too much. And how do we have those two things happening at once? Well, it's fun. But every woman that is watching this, I'm sure it has had moments of both. I I got a lot of being too much, or I was told by subtle, not so subtle kicks under the table often by my from my ex that I was being too much. If I was getting too opinionated or too loud or too uncensored after a glass of wine with friends, it was not uncommon for him to kick me under the table to get me to shut up. So it's it's there, and sometimes it's there more obviously than others. Stuffing down and mistrusting your emotions. And oh, I'm just going to check. We got a comment here. Snort laughed. I'm not alone. Yes, I can see Shannon laughing along, and it tells me I know I'm not alone. Because if I was alone, 28 of you wouldn't have signed up for this. And that's the truth. So yeah, stuffing down, mistrusting your emotions, emotional expressions. Again, emotions are too much for a lot of people. They are too girly, they're too soft, they're not rational. All of these things that keep us from expressing ourselves and also lead us to mistrust our own emotions or not want to express them for fear of being judged or labeled or taken less seriously, what have you. I'm a crier. I used to just be like, can everybody just still believe me, even though tears are coursing down my face about this? My mom used to be like, you should be a lawyer. And I was like, I would cry my way through every defense, Mom. And I look forward to the day where that's okay. But in the meantime, it certainly does tend to make you less of a reliable source or believable. Okay, here's a big one that I've alluded to as well. Distrust of other women, jealousy, and competition. I really feel like this one is shifting, and I feel like it's shifted a lot in my lifetime already. And part of that is me consciously changing the circles I run in, but it's also just becoming more and more talked about and normal. And here's one of the beautiful things about the internet is that women are talking about sitting in circle with other women. And we are breaking this one down. But that whole piece, like catty women, competition, there's only so many jobs or men or positions or whatever to go around, and women need to fight each other for it, was very much a witch wound piece. It's that, oh my gosh, if I call her a witch, maybe they'll leave me alone piece. And it just kind of got perpetuated because it served the patriarchy really, really well. I think this might be my favorite part of healing the witch wound, is fostering collaboration and connection and community with other women. It's something that I do in my Wheel of the Year ceremonies, which happen 8 times a year. I hold them both online and in person because my community isn't just in Calgary, and there's magic in both. But that's my piece. That's my way of continually working to heal this wound for more of us at a collective level. And then this is, mostly already covered, but the fear of repercussions for speaking up, even when we know there aren't. And that's one that often we'll get in our heads, like, why are you so afraid of doing this? Like, there's not going to be a bad outcome from this. My very first Instagram post as my luminous life, I was terrified. It was about perfectionism paralysis. Like, who was going to have any, like, it wasn't ruffling feathers. I wasn't saying anything controversial, but it felt huge and scary and vulnerable just because it does. Before I move on, did anything come up? Did anything bubble to the surface? Any stories, anything that you want to share? Again, feel like connection and sharing is such an important piece of healing this wound, but no pressure. I know there's not a lot of us here. Good. All right. For those of you watching the recording too, if there are stories or things that come up as you watch, as you go through this, if you want to share them with me, don't hesitate to reply to the email that this video was in. I always love to hear those stories. We can always hop on a call and chat about them if anything came up that feels like it needs processing as well. So I'm always here, and the info will be in that email too. Okay, Oh, I'm doing good with the time piece here. I don't always. I'm always worried. Will I fill the time? Will I go way over? I think we're doing pretty good today. So we'll touch on how it's blocking, how the witch wound blocks us from reaching our full potential. Talk a little bit about the homework piece and throat chakra piece, and then tomorrow we'll pick back up and do the more kind of practical, hands-on healing work and the things, the tools that you can use and take away from this. So it's blocking you. It's blocking all of us. None of this is going to come as a surprise because it's kind of the outside, the other side of all of the ways that it shows up, right? So it keeps you small. It keeps you from showing up and saying what you want, saying what's on your mind, sharing your brilliance. So that keeps you from growing into your full potential, from getting the job that you really want sometimes, or getting the opportunity, from being discovered and seen and invited into the circles, because if you're quiet and small and in the corner, it's really hard to have those invites happen. It keeps you from stepping on people's toes, which sometimes is good, but sometimes we need to step on other people's toes a little bit. We can say sorry, but sometimes you need to make other people uncomfortable in order to get to where you're going, to become who you're becoming. And uncomfortable is their problem, as long as you are moving in the world with compassion and harmlessness as your first primary way of being. Sometimes people will be uncomfortable through no fault of your own. That's a them thing. That's a them healing and not a you healing. Stepping on toes, right? You're not going to smash your foot down on somebody's toes, but if you're trying to get through a really tight space and you step on a few toes and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that, but I really need to get over there. And it's like, I have to. That's very different than like, I'm coming through and I'm going to step on all your toes. Okay. Keeping you in unhealthy or outdated relationships when you would otherwise grow. And this could be romantic relationships. Let's harken back to my being kicked under the table. That one certainly was a place where I felt like I owed it. I had to compromise. I had to walk on eggshells and keep small. I was wrong. I was bad. I needed to atone. But it can also be friendships. And sometimes, as I said, sometimes they're unhealthy and sometimes they're just outdated. Sometimes they're people that you have grown past and they have chosen not to grow with you, or you've grown apart. And the witch wound keeps us stuck there because it doesn't let us speak up and advocate for what we need and want and make the choices for ourselves instead of for others. Another way to look at the witch wound, or a really big piece of it, is people pleasing. And a lot of women I know, a lot of my clients have big issues with boundaries and people pleasing. Hint, that's coming up tomorrow. But yeah, so that's a big one, and it's a really hard one too, because again, it comes back to not wanting to hurt other people or make other people feel uncomfortable, but we can often keep ourselves really stagnant because of it. Yeah, and Shannon's just sharing that there's that's coming up for her in her personal life for sure, and it's so hard, and we need support through it. And as we create more sisterhood, we can find the support to get us through it, which I think is just such a beautiful piece of the work. It keeps you from your self-expression. It keeps you from sexual expression as well, because a big piece of demonizing women was demonizing sexuality. If we look back, quite a while ago, but there was a lot of human history where women's sexuality was not controlled, where it was not considered dirty. In fact, it was a representation of the divine feminine. There were priestesses in temples who were like the top of power, who would sleep with whomever they wanted. We look at the Beltane rituals and we think about the Celtic history and tradition. It was very much okay and welcome and even encouraged for people to go out and make merry and have sex on Beltane, not necessarily with a partner that they'd had before. And it was a lot less controlled. It comes back to controlling women's bodies. And so the witch wound shows up in so many ways with our sexual expression, our sexual desires, our ability to hold our sexual selves without shame. Again, ask for what we want, claim what we desire, all of those pieces. That could be a whole its own its whole own masterclass, all on its own. So maybe that's coming. I have a friend who's specializing in that, so maybe we'll do something together. And then, yeah, continually sacrificing your own needs and desires is the other piece. And that's a neat little bow on all of the things. I read in a book the other day, and I can't remember which book it was, but it was something about how, plants don't bloom differently. A flower isn't going to bloom a different shade or come up as a different flower than it is depending on who's walking by. It made me think of Alice in Wonderland and the queen who wanted red roses, and the roses just kept blooming in white. And so the humans had to contort themselves into shapes, and they had, or the cards in this case, and they were painting the roses to make them something other than they were. And the roses, if we think about them, would have been like, what are you doing? I am perfect. And so that thought of, you are of the earth, you are a natural being of this planet, on this planet, part of the living and non-living entities that are here. And it is only humans, to the best of my knowledge. I know birds will mimic other sounds, but they're not pretending to be something that they're not. They simply are, they exist. Plants, animals, a rose is always going to be a rose, no matter what we call it. But a human might turn themselves into something that they're not, just because they think it'll be what others expect of them, or what others want, to prove that they're good enough, or to stay safe. And so that's that witch wound coming through. I wanted to talk about the throat chakra, but I think that I'll start tomorrow by talking more about that, because the hour is coming down to a bit of a close here. I will note that throat chakra and witch wound, very connected. My brief talk on throat chakra is that it's connected to communication and speaking our truth. And so tomorrow I'll kind of go into the ways that we know that it's disrupted, the ways that that disruption shows up, different ways that we can heal it. I'll remind you today as well, if after this day or tomorrow you would like some specific targeted throat chakra healing, energy healing work, I am offering a 30-minute throat chakra energy healing session for $49, which is a bit of a discount off my usual rate. I don't usually do 30-minute sessions, but if you were to do an hour, it's $150. So $49 for half an hour is a discount. And that, if you want that, you can just reply to the email. You can drop a note in the chat here if you want me to send you the link for it. And I'll include a link to book as well in the email, which you'll already have read if you're watching this. And now, before we wrap up and have any kind of last little bit of sharing, what came up, how you're feeling, I want to talk about sacred rage and tonight's homework. So we talked a lot about repressing emotions. We've talked about this horrendous history, this feeling of like, that the Shannon's face when I was telling my story about the crickets and the screaming and the wanting to sink into the floor. First we feel like, oh, and then we feel just angry at the society, at the people that those situations have to exist. And if you think that women's sadness isn't really a super comfy emotion for people to deal with, women's anger is a whole nother ball game. And it's really something that we are not permitted to express and to show. A man who is angry is like, oh, well, like he's just a dude blowing up. A temper tantrum from a man in public is not that uncommon. It's not comfy, but nobody's freaking out about it. A woman who blows up in public is catty, is unhinged, is bitchy, is whatever. We get labeled for it. But our rage is sacred. We are supposed to feel anger, and it is an amazing motivator. It's not somewhere you want to live, but if you let an emotion rock through you, 90 seconds is all you get. Any emotion, big, small, good, bad. I don't think there are bad emotions, but that's the bunny ears there. But so when I was prepping for this, when I was in a breathwork session and I was thinking about what I would offer to start to integrate this healing, And often the first piece of healing is a letting go and a release. And so this afternoon, tonight, tomorrow morning, whenever it is possible for you to do so, I would love for you to scream. And if you live in an apartment or a neighborhood, you may want to scream into a pillow. Pillows are really good at muffling a sound and making you feel uninhibited. If you can go somewhere outside where you know nobody's around and scream, that would be great. If you can get out and somewhere where you can stomp your feet. Oh yeah, closets are good too. I used to go into the walk-in cooler at work when I was a server sometimes and scream. Also cry, but scream. So if you work at a restaurant and have access to a walk-in freezer, they are soundproof. Um, yeah, it's this. I want you to let out some rage. Bring to mind the times you've been hurt or the times people you love have been hurt by this history of wounding, of persecution, and let that rage build and then scream it out. Stomp your feet, pound your fists if you need to, temper tantrum the way a kid might. And then afterwards, take a few deep breaths and ground. Let Mother Earth hold that energy. She's not afraid of your anger. She can take it. She knows what that sacred rage is. And then tomorrow when we come back, I would love to chat about how it felt, if anything came up, if there was any surprises from doing it. Before we close, do you have anything else that those of you who are here, anything else that you want to share or bring to the space before I hit stop on the record? Oh, feeling good. Lovely. Okay, well, for those of you watching the recording, thank you so much. I really want to know how your homework goes. So if you're not here with us tomorrow and you're watching the recording from that too, please email me that you did it. And for those of you here, thank you, and I will see you tomorrow.